Volcanoes are a terrible destructive force. Yet 500 million people live at the foot of these fire monsters.
I think there's definitely a feeling that the gods are speaking when a volcano erupts.
Faced with their anger, men are helpless. When all seems lost, they can only pray for a miracle.
Many volcanoes are themselves regarded as the gods or the house of the spirits.
How do men give meaning to this unleashing of the elements? Offerings, ceremonies, processions. All over the globe, crowds venerate sacred volcanoes.
It's a natural landmark, it's an attraction, and it's also a kind of portal, it's a gateway to somewhere else.
For millennia, these men of faith lead an incredible odyssey, a spiritual journey into a volcanic world populated by deities and spirits. Indonesia has more than 500 active volcanoes. Since the 15th century, Mount Bromo, located in the southeast of the island of Java, has been venerated by the Tengger community, which sees the volcano as the embodiment of the Hindu god Brahma. Each year, the Kasada ceremony takes them 2,329 meters after a dizzying ascent to the edge of the crater. This annual procession is the highlight of the religious life of this community. At the foot of the sacred volcano, Kadi, a Hindu priest, prepares the ceremony by gathering water filtered by the volcanic rock. He is the guardian of this ancestral tradition.
I am a priest from the Wonokitre village. I come to fetch holy water for the Kasada ceremony, so that you may protect us in our future lives, my Lord.
Volcanoes are incredibly dynamic places. So I think if you live by them, you have to try and explain why they are like that. They want the volcano gods to be happy. They want the gods to leave and go back into the mountain kind of satisfied and not angry. And of course, the flip side of that is that when the volcano does erupt, the assumption is that the volcano gods are somehow been angered, and that's a real problem for people.
Natural phenomena are often linked with spirituality, I think, because the phenomena of a volcano erupting is something that is so awe-inspiring that I think we all seek to have an explanation for it. And I think that's why quite often there's a spiritual relationship because of the intense relationship with the land that there is around volcanoes, but also just the raw power that is held within them when they start to erupt.
Mount Bromo erupts on average every 5 years. The volcano's intense activity regularly covers the region in a thick layer of ash. This volcanic dust covers everything, giving birth to vast lunar landscapes. Yet for the hundreds of thousands of inhabitants who live at its feet, Mount Bromo is a force for good. The minerals in its ashes feed the soils and guarantee abundant harvests. Atsoko feeds his whole family thanks to the fertility of the volcanic soils.
The fruits of your labors must be brought back to the Bromo volcano. That is the meaning of the Kasada prayer. Each year, we must bring our harvest as an offering to the volcano, because otherwise it can bring us bad luck. For here on Bromo, we do not want any deaths, no deaths. It just takes our harvest, like cabbages, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and also chilies. It's a duty. Everyone must participate.
I think what we have tried to do in the West is to separate nature from humanity, if you like. We've tried to separate people from natural phenomena. But in many other cultures and cultural traditions, nature and people are very much together. And you find that in many cultures in other parts of the world, you find that people consider themselves to be part of nature. And therefore, that nature, in their interpretation, is responding to things that they do.
As a sign of gratitude, the Tengas return some of these treasures to the volcano. During the night, Kadi, Atsoko, and their community gather to pray and bless the offerings with the holy water gathered from the foot of the volcano. In the early morning, driven by an unbounded faith, the devotees begin their assault on the steep slopes of the volcano. At the end of a grueling ascent, the vast eruptive mouth is finally revealed to them. The offerings are thrown straight into the volcano's smoking crater.
Bromo's is a very spectacular volcano. There's a Hindu temple right at the foot of the cone, but the offerings that are made are kind of syncretic belief systems where animism blends with monotheism, or in this case in Hinduism.
These kinds of offerings are really arise from a belief that people can influence the way in which a deity behaves. So their spiritual belief is that there is a God in this volcano, and if we appease him or her, then they will continue to protect us. And you see this from Indonesia to Italy. You see it in almost every part of the world, even today in many parts of the world where scientific beliefs are dominant.
Etna is the largest active volcano in Europe, an immutable landmark for the whole of Sicily. With more than 100 eruptions in the last century, the Monte Bello, as the Sicilians call it, has left a lasting impression on the most sulfurous island of the Mediterranean. At its feet, the city of Catania and its 300,000 inhabitants maintain a close relationship with the living mountain. Mathilde Rousseau was born in this city of lava, and she is passionate about its history.
Etna is the very essence of the city. Elsewhere in the world, they have the pole star to tell them which way is north. Etna does that job for us.
This extraordinarily active giant of fire spits forth immense waves of lava. Regularly, the inhabitants of Catania are threatened by its fits of rage.
Mount Etna in Sicily is a volcano it's very active, it's a very large mountain, and if you live in a village around the site of the volcano, then there's a chance that once every 100 or 200 years, lava flow will run into your village. And so the stories about what people did to respond to the volcano can very quickly become part of the oral history or the religious observances associated with the volcano.
When the lava flows advance towards the city, the inhabitants turn to their holy protector, Saint Agatha. According to legend, it was she who protected Catania against the eruption in 1639, the biggest in recorded memory. Since then, hundreds of thousands of the faithful have gathered each year in a huge procession to express their gratitude and their devotion to their holy protector.
Cittadini! 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 Siamo tutti tutti!
Legend has it that in front of the outer walls, there was a chapel with a picture of Saint Agatha inside. The chapel was destroyed, but the picture began to float on the lava and indicated the direction it should take. Just then, the lava flow changed direction, and instead of destroying the town, it skirted it and poured into the sea.
Burnt as a martyr at the stake, the patron saint's destiny was closely linked to the incandescent nature of this territory. The inhabitants of Catania are in no doubt. Their prayers will convince Saint Agatha to protect the city against Etna's eruptions.
They have this thing called kind of parallel practices. So when they know about there's a dangerous eruption that threatens them, they'll do all the things the scientists tell them to do, but they'll also go into prayer. They'll pray. And they don't care which one works, whether science works or religion works. So there's a wonderful duality about the Italian volcanoes, about people's belief systems in science and belief systems in God working together.
Cittadini! Cittadini! Siamo tutti devoti tutti!
For 3 days and 3 nights, the Sicilians chant the name of Agatha and implore her protection. In Guatemala, the same Christian faith has mobilized crowds for centuries, and many processions punctuate the religious life of the communities. But in this volcanic land, the link to the giants of fire goes back much further and has its roots in the ancient pre-Hispanic traditions, those of the Mayan civilization. Lake Atitlan was born from an immense eruption.
One of the largest eruptions in the last 100,000 years was the Los Chocollos eruption around 87,000 years ago, which formed Lake Atitlan. The lake occupies a large caldera formed in this colossal event.
This lake was one of the crucibles of the Mayan civilization, which found wealth and prosperity on these shores. Today, overlooked by 3 imposing volcanoes, it nourishes the spiritual life of this people. A stone's throw away, a young volcano has taken over and is shaking the region with its violent eruptions. Appearing in 1922, Santiaguito has since been in permanent activity. Its crater continuously pumps out a thick cloud of ash. For the inhabitants who live at its feet, it is Mother Earth expressing herself and speaking to them. Mario is a shaman. He interprets these volcanic messages and advocates a spiritual life in harmony with the telluric forces.
Today, in the Mayan calendar, is Ochibnor, 3 acquaintances. This is a Mayan ceremony. We are honoring the volcano and invoking our grandparents, our ancestors. In reality, through its energy and strength, the volcano is trying to tell us something. It's expressing itself. It's like the volcano is talking to us. It's saying, "Here I am."
For Mario, the eruption of Santiaguito is a highly symbolic moment.
Nahualcan is when the volcano erupts. There, we are in harmony. The volcano is speaking, expressing itself. From this, I understand that the volcano is made of matter, and living energy. And it tells me that everything on the surface of the earth is alive.
They are incredibly inspirational because of the different things that they do, and they make you understand and realize where you are in terms of your place on the earth.
I think for communities that live on volcanoes, particularly active volcanoes, it's obvious that they're going to build the activity that they see somehow into the cosmology that they hold, their worldview, the way they perceive things.
Behind the scenes of jubilation and crowds chanting their fervor, it is sometimes in the greatest privacy that devotees of volcanoes express their faith. Confidential ceremonies where the soul of the faithful opens up to the spirits that populate the living mountain in salutary seclusion. Ecuador is crossed by the Andes Cordillera, the largest volcanic chain on the planet. Its highest volcano, Cotopaxi, is a landmark for an entire people.
If you're living on the volcano, it's a natural landmark, it's an attraction, it's something that you can't ignore. And it's also a kind of portal, it's a gateway to somewhere else.
Santiago is building a temazcal, a traditional tent that hosts an ancestral ritual.
So, you put it in this position and I'll go on the other side.
Like this or more, Santiago?
Pull a little more. Pull a little more.
The position of the temazcal is not chosen at random. The traditional tent is aligned with the volcano in order to capture its energies. These energies are at the center of their living traditional medicine.
We begin by positioning the temazcal towards the volcano so that there is a straight line between the volcano, the fire, and the temazcal, which promotes healing. The construction is part of the ceremony. At this precise moment, we are already in full ceremony. In a way, it is asking that traditional medicine may return to our people. We want this ancestral medicine that the Spanish conquest and colonization have tried to erase or make us forget, to continue to exist and be very present.
The volcano is a synthesis of all the elements because it condenses and combines all the oppositions that form life and that, by contrast, form the unity of the universe. Water, fire, white, black, male, female. We are constantly in this duality, heaven and earth. The volcano condenses all that. Without fire, without water, there's no volcano.
Temazcal is a ritual of care and purification. By heating the volcanic stones from Cotopaxi, the shaman comes into contact with and lets himself be possessed by Apu, sacred spirit of the volcano. This ritual enables him to heal many ailments of body and mind.
Temazcal purifies your energies. The ritual is performed in a circular hut, which represents a mother's womb. It makes it possible to kill evil and let good be reborn. In the temazcal, the four elements intervene to form a universe together. We heat the stones so that they regain their wisdom of the early times. That's why we plunge them into the incandescent embers. With the water, we make steam, which purifies the energies that surround the temazcal, the people's energies.
One of the ways of explaining how volcanoes behave and explaining volcanic phenomena is to ascribe those phenomena to gods. So here we have gods as the source of power behind the natural world and the behavior of the gods as an explanation for the way the volcanoes are behaving.
In the pantheon of volcanoes, each living mountain has its own temperament.
It's very common, I think, to think of volcanoes as having a human personality. Personification is something that I think we all naturally do. And very often, communities around volcanoes will talk about them as either a he, or actually more commonly in the places where I've worked, as a she. And she who has a temper that she is not afraid to express.
volcanic archipelago of Hawaii is home to the world's most active volcano, Kilauea. Its lava flows are gaining ground on the sea, expanding the island by several dozen hectares each year. Hawaiians see this prodigious activity as the work of the goddess Pele, mistress of fire, earth, and volcanoes. For millennia, the divinity has stamped on the ground, pulled flames from the depths, and erected mountains above the sea.
The goddess Pele is the most important god on Hawaii. She has a retinue of lovers and friends and family, and there are many stories about Pele's exploits and about her anger.
The Hawaiians react philosophically to the rages of their goddess. They see her not as a source of destruction, but creation. With each eruption, layer upon layer, Pele provides new lands. For generations, Pilani's family has witnessed the creative movement that transforms the face of the island day by day. Several times their village, Kalapana, has been swept away by lava flows. But each eruption has miraculously spared their home.
In 1986 is when the first lava came to this area. And so the lava came all the way till the road right there, and that's the highway. That used to be the old Kalapana Road. And so we were told that we needed to evacuate. But my grandmother, she said, no, not yet. So she told us to go and clean the yard, clean the inside of the house. And she said, we are expecting an important guest, a very, very important guest. And if this guest wants to stay, she can have whatever she wants in the house. This is for her.
Under the benevolent gaze of the goddess Pele, the inhabitants of Kalapana have made this infinite cycle a way of life apart.
What appears instinctively in a Western culture to be a disaster or a catastrophe is not necessarily regarded that way in other parts of the world. But many of these people don't want to move. They don't want to move because they don't want to leave their land, they don't want to leave their houses, and often they have religious beliefs that help them rationalize that. So volcanoes had become part of the culture, and that it was accepted really as part of the rhythm of the culture, so that you had cycles of periods of good life and then periods of destruction, periods of good life and periods of destructions.
Hidden in the folds of Kilauea, the lava lake Ale Mau Mau is an open window on the bowels of the volcano. In this vast magmatic cauldron, jets of lava burst forth before falling back and melting into the original magma. The island's inhabitants, who venerate the goddess Pele as much as they fear her, have been dancing and singing in her honor for generations. This fervor has given birth to an art form that is unique in the world, the secular tradition of ula.
Pele is a creative goddess. The Hawaiian people, we think very positive of her. She is a loving goddess. She gives us beautiful land all the time. It's a gift from her, really. She destroys some land, but she creates more new land over the old land. So it is a gift, we feel, to us.
It's all about that respect for nature, respect for the magma, the lava. And so the Hawaiians have a name for everything. We have a name for every different part of the lava flow. So it's not just about Pele, it's about the relationship of every entity, every element that surrounds us.
In Tanzania, another god has made his home in a volcano.
Many volcanoes are themselves regarded as the gods or the house of the spirits. And in the case of Old Onyuolengai in Tanzania, for example, the name means the mountain of God.
The mountain is home to the great Engai, creator god, source of all things. Mwenga is a young warrior. He regularly climbs to the top of the volcano to attract the god's favor.
Old Onyuolengai is a good example. The fact that it is called God isn't down to its crater hole, but because it spits fire. For us, Maasai, we believe in this sacred mountain, that God has given us our cows, goats, calves. God has given us everything.
Engai created the savanna and the herds that live there. He also created the Maasai to watch over the flocks. At the foot of the living mountain, the traditional songs ring out and mingle with the roars of the active crater. Hours of trails separate this volcanic territory from the closest town. Away from the modern world, these men and women go with the flow of the Langai. The volcano is their landmark, a lighthouse in this ocean of rock and ash.
Old Onyuolengai helps us. We make sacrifices for him. We sacrifice goats, among other things, and that allows women who cannot have children to become fertile. Is that not a benefit? So there is a God. Yes, there is a God who makes the rain. God makes the rain.
Voldonia Lengai volcano in Tanzania is a unique volcano. Of course, they're all unique, but Lengai is particularly unusual. It's the only volcano on the planet that erupts washing soda. So it has carbonate lavas, which we do see back in geological time, but it's the unique example today. Lengai also erupts the runniest lavas that we've observed on Earth. They are so fluid, it looks almost like water just sloshing across the ground. And on eruption, they form kind of dark grey masses on the ground, but over time, quite rapidly, they hydrate in the atmosphere and turn a kind of white or light grey colour and become very, very crumbly.
This white ash expelled by the volcano is sacred for the Maasai. The Laibon, spiritual guide of the village, contacts Angai by means of this volcanic dust. Before each ascent, Mwenga comes to consult him.
I shall make sure everything is going well. My calabashes will tell me. There. I see what will happen in the mountains. Everything is clear. I can give you my blessing.
It's one of the steepest volcanoes I've ever climbed. Really is one where, as you get towards the top, you go 2 steps up and you slide down a step and you just try and keep going. And then you look down from the edge and it's incredibly vertiginous. The slopes just drop away from you. So it's very dramatic.
I arrived here atop Voldonia Lengai, and I feel very well. I've just arrived without any problems, and I feel fine. It's really wonderful.
There's no other setting on Earth, there's no other place you can go on Earth where you get such a vivid demonstration of the power of something under your feet that is much more immense than you can imagine.
Volcanoes are aesthetically appealing, and they can be wonderful places to live near. The volcano becomes your neighbor, it becomes your friend, it becomes a part of your life to have it on your doorstep.
In Japan, volcanoes occupy a central place in Shinto traditions. Here, the Japanese have developed an intimate, personal link with the living mountains. Shintoism considers natural sites as places where spirits, kemis, reside. Guardians of a place, they stay on a mountain, protect a forest, lodge under a waterfall, or nestle at the top of a volcano. Mr. Honda has a particularly strong bond with these spirits of nature and his neighbor, Mount Unzen. At the foot of this volcano, one of the most active in Japan, this man maintains a mystical relationship with the living mountain.
Mount Unzen is like a god to us. But he also makes us feel a typically Japanese emotion by belonging to this earth. He makes us want to be friends with him for eternity.
Inhabitant of Shimabara, Mr. Honda lived through the terrible eruptions of the early 1990s. The Unzen is known worldwide for its deadly pyroclastic flow. For more than 5 years, these incandescent avalanches have burned and destroyed everything in their path. His home, the nearest one to the Unzen, is the only one in the neighborhood to have escaped the damage caused by the volcano's anger. Today, trees uprooted by the eruptions have come back to life in the middle of his garden.
This is a camphor tree. It symbolizes survival. It reminds me of the disaster. It was damaged by trees during a pyroclastic flow. We had to cut it down, and I brought it home and planted it. My garden has several such damaged trees. Like this mulberry, for instance. According to the Shintoist way of thinking, I inherited the feeling of wanting to take root here from the trees. I listened to them, and I stayed. This mountain is the center of our existence here. People lead a normal life. Even if the volcano begins to erupt again, or another disaster happens, this is the place where I feel most at peace. Only here does my spirit feel at ease. Only here.
I became interested in how other people saw volcanoes and had rationalized the existence of volcanoes and volcanic eruptions in the past. So I heard stories about how there were gods inside volcanoes and about how volcanoes were the results of gods' activities. And I thought, this is something that science needs to try and understand. We need to try and engage with those views, not simply to dismiss them.
When it comes to volcanoes, religion and science jostle to tell their story. People on the slopes of the living mountains forge myths and legends to make sense of eruptions, while volcanologists decipher the Earth's shifts and jolts using the tools of modern science. But the line between these two visions is finer than it may appear. In New Zealand, the Maori gods found refuge in the folds of the volcanoes. They populate the hot springs and steep reliefs of the living mountains. For the Maoris, these places are tapu, which means sacred. When a team of volcanologists wants to study the volcano Ruapeu, one of the most mythical in New Zealand, it is accompanied by the tribe's spiritual guide, who lives at its foot. Here, science and religion advance hand in hand. Before the operation begins, the guide pays his respects to the spirits that live in the crater lake. Under the aegis of the great Ruapeu, ancient tradition meets modern science.
He karanga no hoki tēnei ki a koe tā kakaari o tātou nā piki. Tēnei nō rā te reo karanga ki a koe. Hara mai koe ki te tautoko i a mātou nei mai. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākina kina ki uta. Kia mātaratara ki tai. Kia hi ake ana te atakura he tia.
For the scientists too, Ruapeu is a mythical volcano. Its anger is often unpredictable. Thanks to a close dialogue with the Maori communities who live at the foot of the volcano, the scientists hope to learn more about the eruptive history of Ruapeu. The legendary stories of this people, handed down from generation to generation, are full of valuable clues to the giant's past eruptions.
In New Zealand, Maoris and scientists are really working together. At the scientific level, we're trying with the instruments, the technology we have, to understand what's going on at the volcanic level and what might happen in the future. But the Maoris are helping us with all the volcanic events that took place in the past. So this harmony between the two allows us to compare what we have with technology and what they have with traditions. And together, it lets us really understand what's going on in the volcano and what might happen in the future.
I think there doesn't have to be a clash. I think there can be an accommodation. And that's why in a lot of places there's a lot of dialogue going on between the volcano scientists and the authorities and with faith and spiritual leaders on volcanoes to be able to communicate in terms that a population will understand.
One of the things that both the volcanologists and the communities who live on the volcano share during a volcanic eruption is uncertainty about what's going to happen next. And it's very important then for the communities and the volcanologists to have a dialogue, because what we want to do is share the knowledge that we have and share our understanding of that uncertainty so that everybody can make decisions that are going to work best for them in the face of that activity.
The men of faith and the scientists come together around their common passion for volcanoes and share a deep respect for these mysterious territories.
With us as Māori, it's never ever been about ownership. It's always just been about kaitiakitanga. Kaitiakitanga just means taking care of the surroundings and the land we have. There is one saying that was said by our latest chief's father, Sir Hepi Te Heuheu, and he addressed New Zealand by saying, "Whakangaro te tangata, toi tū te whenua," which means all living things shall fall when the sun sets. But when the sun rises the next day, the mountains and the lands will always endure. And so, based on that, there's always three words I always alert everybody with, and I believe knowledge brings respect, and respect will bring awareness. And with those three words, our lands and our surroundings will endure for the rest of time.
Volcanoes preceded us and will continue to unleash their power long after we have gone. But as long as man walks the earth, he will carry in his soul the scorching fire of volcanoes.
For thousands of years, people have used their belief systems to understand how the planet works. Science has come along in the last few hundred years. Volcano science has come along in the last century or so. So why should people give up thousands of years of understanding just because some expert or professor comes in and tells them that how a volcano works? That doesn't seem very sensible to me.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
Fiery furnaces, lunar landscapes, deserts of ashes. Volcanoes are symbols of destruction and desolation.
There are many ways in which volcanoes constitute a threat to life.
And yet, in the four corners of the Earth, 500 million men and women are today living on time bombs. What irresistible force attracts them to these terrible giants of fire?
Across the course of human history, volcanoes have given humanity far more than they've taken away.
For human societies, volcanoes are an inexhaustible wealth of resources.
That's delicious. Firm and fragrant.
Fertile lands, precious materials, sources of heat and energy.
And if you live in a place where the soils are exceptionally fertile, you're going to stay in that place.
But the treasures of volcanoes must be earned. Only armed with courage and unshakable selflessness can we hope to conquer them. In Tanzania, the old Duanyo Lengai volcano towers above a unique lake, Lake Natron. Steeped in chemicals of volcanic origin, its waters are unfit for human consumption, but they hide a quite different treasure. As they dry, the shores of the lake reveal large patches of salt. This salt is an invaluable resource for the region's inhabitants. During the 6 months of the dry season, the Maasai women come here daily to collect large slabs of the precious mineral. Among them is Anna. Armed with a simple machete, she tirelessly combs vast stretches of lakeshore in search of the best slabs of salt.
It's a sound that footsteps make and the light-colored soil that tell you there's something salty inside.
Lengai lava is unique. Rich in sodium, it is black when it emerges from the volcano's mouth and becomes white on contact with the air.
Old Lengai erupts. Materials themselves are made of sodium carbonate. that eventually finds its way into Lake Natron. Lake Natron is an extraordinary lake. The water is alkaline, feels very soapy, and the lake develops a crust of what they call trona, sodium hydrogen carbonate. So from a distance, Lake Natron looks quite remarkable. It's a bright white body where you have a crust of a particular mineral which is formed on top of this alkaline lake.
I do this work to feed my children. You cannot survive without working hard. You have to work hard, even if you cut your fingers and sweat a lot. We give the salt to our cows, we sell it, we use all its benefits. If someone has a stomachache, they must drink it mixed in a glass of water. We gather the salt, wait for it to dry, and load up the mules to take it home. When it's market day, it's a chance for us to sell it. We sell salt for the money, not just for feeding our children, but also for things like buying goats, paying for our children's schooling, helping sick people to pay for the hospital, or for clothes, for heating, and feeding a baby like this one so she doesn't go hungry.
People live around volcanoes largely because of the things that they give, much more than the things that they take away. And often volcanoes erupt periodically, and then for much of the time it's a great place. So people can move away while the volcano is at its most dangerous, but after all, the place where they live is their home.
We have forgotten what it is like to be a subsistence dweller, to be a person that wakes up every morning with the challenge of feeding his or her family from the immediate environment.
In Indonesia, Kawah Ijen contains another mineral treasure in its smoking crater lake, sulfur.
So the lake is what Ijen is famous for, and they have a lot of sulfur and chlorine and other constituents that give the lake its particular chemistry. The other thing that it's well known for is the mining of sulfur by members of the local community. The sulfur gases can react to form liquid sulfur.
At dawn, armed with shoulder baskets, hundreds descend into the bowels of the volcano. Here, they are known as the strongmen of Java. A source of both revenue and prestige, the manual extraction of sulfur is a highly prized activity. Sano is a seasoned miner who, despite the extreme harshness of the work, takes great pride in his job.
There's nothing better than this tool. This one's a good one.
He has spent his whole life in this volcanic hell.
I've worked here for 28 years without a helmet or gloves. I've never had a problem. I'm used to it. What's dangerous is the smoke coming from the lake. This one is not dangerous. The one from the lake is dangerous. Round shapes on the surface is a sign. The water starts to bubble and smoke immediately comes out.
Once they've collected the sulfur, they carry a phenomenal weight of it back up this steep path out of the crater and then some way down the flank of the volcano. And that combined effort, I think, of the being in these gases and carrying such heavy weights, it's very, very, very hard on the body. I've tried lifting up one of these crates before. I could barely lift the thing, so I don't know how they do it.
I can carry up to 75 kilos on my shoulders. So if I do 2 trips a day, I carry 150 kilos.
Sarno's sulfur harvest earns him on average 80 euros per month, double the average income in the region.
"52 kilos.
Sulfur is bought from the miner, then transformed. A key ingredient for sugar bleaching, cosmetics manufacturing, and fertilizer research. It's one of the cornerstones of the local economy. To the southeast of Java lies another volcano that feeds the communities at its feet. From atop its 2,329 meters, Mount Bromo regularly spews out huge plumes of ashes, covering the region with a thick grey coat. Yet, it takes just a few years for this volcanic ash to break down and feed the soils of all the precious minerals it contains.
Volcanoes can be very beneficial places to live because they erupt material that's very easily weathered, that releases nutrients. And so very quickly after a volcanic eruption, the system can re-establish and the volcanic ecosystem can be vibrant.
From a grey, arid desert, the region is transformed into an oasis of greenery, constantly cultivated by its inhabitants. The rural village of Semero Lawang is located less than 3 kilometers from Bromo's smoking mouth. Atsoko, a young farmer, takes full advantage of the fertility of the mountain, of ash and fire.
Here we have 2 types of land. One that is grey, almost white, and the land here, which is black. Every 5 years, sometimes 10 years, we have eruptions. Bromo brings us fertilizer. The land is renewed, otherwise the harvest will not be good. It's so fertile here that many things grow, such as potatoes, sweet potatoes, leeks, peppers, corn. It suits all plants.
No soil in the world is more spontaneously fertile than volcanic soil. The volcanic soil from the degradation, the decomposition of lava, is the only one that is spontaneously quite fertile, because lava contains all the mineral elements that the plant needs to grow. So, logically, man notices that, and logically, he exploits it.
Daikon only grows on Sakurajima. It's the world's biggest radish, and it's found nowhere else. It weighs around 6 kilos.
Located south of Kyushu Island, Sakurajima is one of the most active volcanoes in Japan. Its explosive activity makes it one of the country's most dangerous, in the case of a major eruption. But these daily eruptions, far from representing a danger, are a real blessing for the region's farmers.
One of the most dramatic manifestations of the fertility of volcanic soil comes from Sakurajima. On the plains around Sakurajima, which are coated with volcanic ash very frequently, people are able to grow radishes to enormous size, turnips, and it's just fascinating to think about what it is that in the soil that allows these vegetables to grow in such an extraordinary way.
Volcanic ash adds minerals into the soil which can increase crop yields in some cases. Volcanic ash also adds in particles of different sizes to the soil, and that can increase the productivity through improved drainage of the soils.
I've got used to talking to my daikons as if they were my children. When I take care of them, I encourage them to grow. I tell them, go ahead, grow well, as I plant them. If the daikon is big, I am very happy. If it is smaller, my happiness is cut in half. I am not a volcano specialist, but Sakurajima is close to us, and its presence is like a family. Like my ancestors, my grandfather, my grandmother, and my parents. Yes, because the biggest radishes in the world grow at the foot of Sakurajima.
In 1999, the volcano Tungura Hua erupted, releasing an avalanche of incandescent ash that destroyed everything in its path. Overnight, the inhabitants of the little village of Paliktahua, located just a few kilometers from the volcano, lost their houses and their lands. But armed with boundless resolve and courage, the community has returned to these volcanic ash-nourished lands and organized itself to work them collectively. The volcano has united the men, who drew strength from this ordeal to build a common future together.
This land is very good, very productive. The whole community sows together. Then everyone profits from the sale. They all encouraged us to go on working and organize these community fields. The community is a group of human beings. We are several families in the village.
We have done quite a bit of research on Tungurahua in Ecuador, and what we found there is that over time the volcanic ash has actually caused the farmers to change how they're farming.
What that's meant is that the farmers who live around the volcano have adapted their practice in order to be able to respond to the activity of the volcano and to mitigate some of the impacts of the ash. People who live near volcano make changes in order to maintain their livelihood, in order to be able to stay living near the volcano.
In the shadow of Tungurahua, the region's inhabitants have joined forces to revive the local economy. Every week, the community sells its products at the Rio Bamba market.
Every Saturday, our family comes to the market to sell our products. This year, we planted 80% of our land. And the soil is so productive. How can we not be satisfied? This represents almost 40 hectares. That is a very large farm. We produce beans, potatoes, corn, so that we can continue to feed the population in the event of an eruption. Tungurahua has always been here. We call it Mother Tungurahua or Grandmother Tungurahua. Personally, I believe it is our friend, because thanks to him, 200 of us in the community have come together. But for the volcano, everyone would work for themselves. We should be grateful to him.
In Iceland, the fertility of the Vestman Islands has enabled the growth of an activity rarely encountered on such small volcanic islets: pastoralism. The archipelago of the Vestman Islands is composed of 14 islands that were raised from the sea by underwater eruptions. Each of these islands represents an opportunity for the men in this region of the world where fertile lands are so rare.
In many parts of the world, you have stories about volcanoes and volcanic eruptions that have involved the creation of new land, particularly of new islands. And land, of course, in any culture is important, okay? To own land is really to have power. And it's not just the ownership of land, but it's also the productive potential of that land as well.
An eruption of phenomenal violence is at the origin of this unprecedented form of transhumance. In 1973, a volcano appeared right in the middle of Jaime, the only inhabited island of the archipelago. Lava fountains and flows threatened to sweep away the island's little fishing village, and the whole population was evacuated. But that disaster also triggered a miracle. The huge quantity of ash spewed out by the eruption spread all over the archipelago, covering the Vestman Islands with this incredible volcanic fertilizer. Today, these islands are covered with a rich, luxuriant grass, an exceptional pasture for sheep. Each year, Biani takes his flocks in an extraordinary transhumance, an island transhumance.
I have lived here since I was very young in this archipelago, and I always saw sheep brought here. They spend the winter here in good conditions, sheltered. We kept up the tradition. I think, given the current situation, that it's better here in the islands than it is in southern Iceland.
But to reach these green pastures requires a tailor-made logistics operation.
We'll need to use a lifting arm because the sea is bad in the east.
On these volcanic islands with cliffs eaten away by the erosion, there is no pier. The flock is hoisted onto dry land using a winch to a height of more than 20 meters. For nearly 3 months, these sheep will graze peacefully on this dormant volcano. The exceptional grass on this volcanic land gives their flesh a unique taste. In Hawaii, Mauna Loa is the largest volcano on the planet. Layer after layer, the lava flows have built a colossus of basalt. For tens of kilometers, the island of Hawaii exhibits its windswept lava fields. Only a few ferns and shrubs can withstand these harsh conditions. Here, life has taken root thanks to the hand of man. In the crevices of the volcano, an inhabitant has found refuge and a perfect place for growing. John Wilson protects his banana trees from the wind in the folds of Mauna Loa.
I came here because of the caves and the volcano. A puka is a Hawaiian word for hole in the ground. And everyone knows that bananas do not do very well in high wind. So I said, I've got this puka. I will just put the farm down in there where it's protected from the wind. and hopefully produce many, many years of good bananas. Well, the hole was already here, but the rocks were scattered about at random. And so we relocated the rocks so that they would form terraces. And then I brought in brown cinder, and then we mixed it with all the vegetation we could find, branches, leaves, cardboard, any organic material, mixed it all together and spread it out in the bottom of the puka. We're taking what might take nature hundreds of years to do, or longer. We're getting that down into 5 years.
I think volcanoes hold a special place for communities who live around volcanoes, because volcanoes are a seeable thing in the natural environment, and often those mountainous environments offer a place of sanctuary or somewhere very special and beautiful.
Many people say that volcanoes are very dangerous, and so why do people still live on them? I think the answer to that is that the people who live on them don't really consider those volcanoes very dangerous, or at least they consider that the quality of life that they can have by living on a volcano is really worth the possible threat from that volcano.
I think this volcano is not only a good thing for me, but something I really appreciate and I like. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that volcano. The volcano and what it does and what it has done over thousands or millions of years is what makes this area what I like. And I can look around in the caves, on the surface, and I can see just a tremendous number of aesthetically pleasing rock shapes and other features. So the volcano for me is a very positive thing.
Across the course of human history, volcanoes have given humanity far more than they've taken away, because they give you wonderful materials. So you go to almost any volcanic area and the city nearby is built from the volcano. The stone that builds the buildings and streets are from the volcano.
Thanks to volcanoes, man has erected his finest monuments. In Auvergne, lava stone made a fortune for these volcanic territories. The monuments of Auvergne seem literally carved out of basalt. The Saint-Michel-des-Guys church stands proudly atop a volcanic chimney. And Clermont-Ferrand proudly displays its black cathedral, built from the legendary Volvic stone. Its dark color has earned the monument its nickname, the Coleman's Cathedral. Thanks to the lava stone, man has gone closer to the stars, building ever higher monuments. But by digging in the basement of these volcanic lands, he has also begotten a mysterious underground world. The city of Naples grew up in the shadow of Vesuvius, one of the most active volcanoes in Europe. And though it regularly threatened the city with its wrath, Naples wouldn't be the Naples we know today without its venerable neighbor. Some 14,000 years ago, a cataclysmic eruption covered the whole of the region with a layer of volcanic material, yellow tuff. This stone, with unique properties, was extracted from its basements to build the city of Naples. At 40 meters underground, there's another Naples, a mirror image. Vincenzo Albertini is a geologist. For years, he's been studying this underground network, dug into the volcanic rock. Its first tunnels date back to antiquity.
We entered here in the heart of the Greco-Roman aqueduct. It's the single greatest hydraulic work carried out by the Romans in the imperial era. Just think, a tiny slope that allowed the water to travel kilometers and kilometers before reaching the city of Naples, some 80 kilometers further on. We are in one of the 14,000 tanks. Imagine that above us is a building. From this building, you had to send down an amphora or a recipient of the period. And even after the fall of the Roman Empire, that continued to work in the same way. Just send down a container, collect the water, haul it up to your home. As a result, every building had its own tank. The stone here is the same as the one we find up there. Everything that's missing here has been used to build up above. An inverted city, a Naples, 2/3 of which has an empty basement because the stone has been used to give shape to the buildings which are on the surface.
Some volcanoes erupt material that is much less dense than basalt. This makes a fantastic building stone because it is light and strong, but it's also quite easy to carve out. So many locations in Naples are built out of these sorts of volcanic tuffs.
Today, other properties of tuff are being put to the test in Naples' underground network. Its ability to maintain a constant temperature and humidity. A boon that Neapolitans have put to good use, growing another symbol of the city, basil.
That's delicious. Firm and fragrant. The turf is a good thermal conductor, so it allows for good insulation with a temperature that remains, in summer as in winter, almost always the same, between 14 and 16 degrees. This basil is grown in an absence of pollution, of course, as it grows underground. Naples has been lucky to have all these volcanoes. So many volcanoes mean a lot of life, a lot of work, and a bright future.
Still in Italy, there's another mythical volcano which spreads its benefits to a whole region. In summer, Sicily is a hot, arid territory, swept by dry winds from the Sahara. The island regularly suffers from serious water shortages. And yet, around its volcano, Etna, vegetation and crops flourish and cover the region with a thick green mantle.
Volcanoes create microclimates by changing the atmospheric conditions around them. And the presence of the volcano itself changes the wind patterns and the airflow around the volcano, and that can locally change the meteorology as well.
It's a very high mountain, and it kind of creates its own weather, creates its own climate. You often find that in the morning the cloud builds up and then it envelops the summit. You don't see the volcano in the afternoon, and of course all that moisture starts to fall into the volcano, and as it then moves through,
Boris Benke is a volcanologist. Perched at more than 3,300 meters in altitude, he tirelessly travels the active summit of Etna to understand how it works. He sees Etna as a natural water tower.
If the mountain wasn't here, the volcano wasn't here. Here, the land was low, relatively flat. It was warm and dry. It would be very different without this volcano, which is extremely valuable because Sicily is normally a very dry place. So that's probably one of the reasons why there has been so much population around the volcano for so long, especially in this sector where there are the most springs. Because there's a lot of precipitation. There's snow that will thaw during the spring. There are lots of storms, rain on the mountain. As we can see, this rock is pretty dense, but it is porous. There are a lot of fractures, so the water disappears into the mountain. There's no river, no stream. It all goes into the mountain, which acts like a sponge. It's a huge water table.
This water circulating in Etna, filtered by porous volcanic rocks, flows into the valley in the form of an infinity of small springs.
The island of Sicily is in the Mediterranean. It gets very hot in the summer, but nonetheless, the flanks of Mount Etna offer perfect arable land. That means that even in places that are typically barren and lack water, the volcanoes themselves can actually be repositories of water.
If you're in a desertic region and trying to eke out a living, volcano is the natural place to live because the volcano attracts some cloud and some rain and you can collect some water.
For the Sicilians, Etna's water is a blessing. They call their volcano La Mama. Thanks to this beneficent force, they grow oranges with a flavor that is unique. And when the water meets the volcano's heat, there's another treasure trove.
When you have a volcano with sources of water around it, those volcanoes will often show what we call geothermal activity. So there might be vents of steam, pools of hot water, fractures releasing gases to the surface.
The geothermal energy results from the fact that the crust contains water, and that water gets heated up by the hot magma which is stored underneath the volcano. And we can exploit that geothermal energy.
In Japan, the monkeys of the volcanic zone of Jigo-Kudani take advantage of the hot springs to combat the harsh winter. These thermal springs, whose temperature can rise to 60 degrees, are a real refuge for the monkeys, who dive in with delight as soon as the outside temperature drops below 5 degrees. But in this country that has the highest concentration of hot springs in the world, men also benefit from this volcanic heat. At the foot of Sakurajima, the heat of the depths, expelled to the surface by volcanic activity, is the subject of many applications, some of which are surprising.
The Ibusuki thermal springs have existed for 300 years. The sand here weighs between 50 and 60 kilos, and its temperature is kept between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius. Lying on your back is naturally good for the circulation. The amount of blood sent from the heart, known as cardiac output, goes up when people lie on the hot, wet sand because their blood vessels are dilated. Sand baths help the circulation. They also have a detoxifying effect, which is in fact very fashionable nowadays.
People have used geothermal waters and kind of gases for millennia to do all sorts of things. There are huge belief systems around it. They're really special sites, but ordinary things.
People use the geothermal energy directly. They use hot water from the groundwater system directly. They may use that for heating, for bathing. They might use that for cooking as well. Geothermal energy is one of the benefits of living near a volcano.
On the highlands of Iceland, a real kingdom of volcanoes, men have long since learned to exploit the heat from the depths. A chef has taken advantage of the intense volcanic activity in his country. By channeling the vapors that emerge all over his village, he has developed a very local cooking technique, volcanic cuisine.
We are using this power here to cook with.
Okay.
And we have learned to use it to bake cake and carrot cake and everything. And also we are making nice bread. And over here we are doing very nice potatoes.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you try this carrot here, it's a different taste.
Really?
Yeah, different taste.
The way this came about was great. It came to me in a dream. I awoke at 4 a.m. and had dreamed about cooking and how I had to put all of this to good use. I went out and started building, and my wife said to me, "You've totally lost the plot. Take a pill and come back to bed."
So we are making lamb goulash.
In this unusual kitchen, everything now uses geothermal energy.
We have the pressure at 14 kilobar in the pan here, and we have steam at 170 degrees centigrade. So it is really very hot. That helps us cook with all these pans. This oven used to be a 34 kilowatt electric oven that used a lot of energy. The meter could be used as a tumble dryer, it turned so fast. We changed the connections, removed all the electrical equipment, installed an old plumbing tap, put a pipe inside, and made a spiral. Now it works wonderfully well.
Bon appetit.
We can say that cooking in this environment connects us with nature, with the wild. It's like living with danger in a way, being aware of it and respecting it. This allows us to use the energy that comes from the bowels of the earth.
Beyond local use, the heat from volcanoes carries infinite potential. One of the major challenges of our post-industrial society is that of energy transition.
if we're only able to capture even a small amount of that heat energy and convert it into useful energy that we can use, then it can make a tremendous effect.
Increasingly, as the planet tries to think of different energy sources, geothermal will become a really important one. For heat, first of all, but increasingly in very particular places for power generation, for electricity.
The huge Wairakei power station draws from the depths the geothermic heat produced by the volcanoes. Wairakei is the largest geothermal field in New Zealand, an area of 25 square kilometers. It is located in the Taupo volcanic zone and fed by the volcano's magma chamber. Greg Bignell is a geologist. He puts his knowledge at the service of this new energy revolution.
The largest of those geothermal systems is the Wairakei geothermal field. That generates about 157 megawatts. So that's comparable to about 160,000 homes of electricity being generated. Geothermal energy is a resource deep beneath our feet. The process starts many thousands of years ago with rain falling on the hills to the east and the west of the Taupo volcanic zone. That water slowly percolates through the earth via cracks and fissures in the rock to reach some depth within the central volcanic zone where magma sits in the near surface and starts to heat that water.
Right now, New Zealand's geothermic activity supplies around 20% of its electricity. But that figure is constantly growing. Volcanoes are now an asset in one of the greatest challenges man has ever had to face, and can offer a new energy destiny to entire nations.
Geothermal energy is starting to be really popular because it's clean, it doesn't produce CO2 to go to the atmosphere, and certainly on a geological scale, it's renewable. You know, the heat is always coming out.
Geothermal activity is one of the key sources of renewable energy for the future. I would love to see it used more widely than it is. It's fairly easy, it's fairly straightforward, and it's there and it's free.
Men have found refuge in the shadow of volcanoes. Far from their destructive image, these living mountains are veritable oases, inexhaustible sources of wealth.
They give more than they take away. But also there's something about the volcano. It has an identity. I think people are drawn to that. So these are the most incredible landscapes to live in. And I think if I was going to retire and go somewhere, I'd probably go and live on a volcano.
For millions of years, they have disemboweled the earth, sent continents ablaze, covered entire regions under a deadly carpet of ashes, and we stand in their way.
Volcanoes are actually one of the most dynamic and dramatic manifestations of the power of nature.
In recent centuries, volcanoes have killed nearly 300,000 people across the globe. Yet 500 million men and women daily defy these fire monsters.
All of the houses that was once here got covered by the lava flow.
So if they become destructive, if we're in the way of them, they just do their thing, and humanity is turned up, and sometimes we're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
In this classic David versus Goliath, they find new levels of solidarity and ingenuity to thwart the volcano's assaults.
It's critical for communities who live around volcanoes to be able to adapt to the volcanic activity.
Faced with the elements unleashed, man fights an eternal battle of fierce resistance. Located off Iceland, the Vestman archipelago is made up of 14 islands that have been thrust out of the sea by underwater eruptions. Their peaceful appearance belies an intense volcanic activity.
Yes, it's incredible after all these years. 42, 43 years. I want to protect my family. Not my house, but my family. And I thought, we are dying. Death is coming now.
(1973), Gerdur and the inhabitants of Heimaey suffer the terrible bite of the lava.
I remember the television pictures showing this amazing lava fountains and this town that was just being engulfed by lava.
Gerdur's house is just in front of the fault from which lava flows. She has a ringside seat of the eruption.
At 1:20 a.m., there was a big earthquake, really huge, and my whole corridor was lit up. I went to see what the light was, and I opened the curtains and saw an enormous column of fire just in front of my window. My husband said, "Dress the children, we must flee." We found ourselves paralyzed in front of the window because we were watching the earth open. It exploded and went in two directions.
Whether it takes the form of flows, fountains, or destructive explosions, the insatiable appetite of incandescent lava is a threat to man.
The noise and the smell, and also the visual aspects, it's really an assault on the senses. Especially the noise, it's actually deafening. But the smell as well of the lava and the heat, even though you can be 500 meters away from a fire fountain, the heat can be absolutely extraordinary.
Lava flows can be destructive because they can cover large areas, which means that they can make land unusable. They're also destructive to infrastructure, so they can destroy houses and other types of infrastructure.
The 5,000 inhabitants are evacuated, not knowing whether they'll see their little town again. The eruption continues for 6 months. While the lava fountains devour the houses, the flows advance dangerously towards the port, the economic heart of the village. If the lava obstructs access to the port, Heimaey is finished. But a handful of men decide to stay on the island, determined to fight. Armed with simple water cannons, they tried to stop the lava flows. Sigi was one of them.
Where we sprayed the most, we could see it stopping. But the lava was trying to get by at both ends. So we tried to fix things. But there were soon no more pumps because we melted 1 or 2 motors each day. So the American army brought in pumps from Texas. That enabled us to spray a bigger area of lava and hold it back. And then to get on top of it and cool it down in order to consolidate the part that held everything in.
The town is saved in extremis. Today, a huge natural barrier formed by cooled lava protects the harbor from wind and storms. The Himae community has emerged stronger and closer than ever from this terrible ordeal.
I was a young single man, 24 years old. For better or for worse, I wouldn't have missed that experience for anything.
But the battle against lava is one that other peoples have almost lost. In the early 1990s, Hawaii was ravaged by Kilauea's lava flows of an intensity similar to that of 2018. Kalapana, a neighborhood of 100 inhabitants, was literally wiped from the map. Pilani's family have lived on these shifting lands for generations.
In 1986 is when the first lava came to this area. And so the lava came all the way till the road right there, and that's the highway. That used to be the old Kalapana Road. And so we were told that we needed to evacuate. Lava comes, the lava doesn't touch the house and the house burn. The lava is far from the house. Just the heat of the lava, it combusts. Then the lava comes and it goes under the house. Prior to the lava flow, this whole area was full of mango trees, coconut trees. It was just so lush and green. It was very much a paradise, yeah.
Kilauea has been in permanent eruption since 1983. The huge quantity of lava, which has been spewed out more than 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools per day, remodels the island territory as it advances irreversibly towards the sea. By plunging into the ocean, the lava creates new lands, but it leaves a trail of destruction in its wake.
What will happen is that the population within immediate reach of the volcano will be evacuated, and they will have to go and live somewhere completely different for a while. And then once the eruption is over, they will come back and reoccupy their houses. But in the cases of some of these phenomena, pyroclastic flows and lavas, they will come back to discover the land completely changed and their houses perhaps destroyed.
In the aftermath of the disaster, the inhabitants do not let themselves be downhearted and rebuild in the same spot where their old houses lie, 10 meters under the cooled lava.
Long ago, there were over 250 families that lived in here, and many of the homes got covered by in fact, all of the houses that was once here got covered by the lava flow. Every single house is a new house. Many of the families just removed their valuables and they watched their home go up in flames.
The Hawaiians have learned to accept this cycle of creative destruction.
It's all about that respect. Respect for nature, respect for the magma, the lava. And so the Hawaiians have a name for everything. We have a name for every different part of the lava flow.
The Hawaiian Islands are all volcanoes, and the native Hawaiian population have grown up in those landscapes, and particularly on the big island of Hawaii. So a lot of their culture, I think, is really imbued by the lava that is omnipresent in their landscape.
Yet the destruction caused by Kilauea offers a real opportunity, that of a way of life apart. These lunar landscapes attract a population weary of the tumult of modern society, in search of a new connection with the forces of nature. A community of hardcore enthusiasts has assembled on the lava fields, ready to risk everything to live closer to the volcanic forces.
The place where they live is their home, and often these are, as well as being great providers for their livelihoods, these are places of intense beauty, and it's where their relatives are, it's where they grew up. And in much the same ways we'd feel an attachment to where we grew up, why wouldn't people who live around volcanoes feel that, even when it's in a moment of eruption?
We know that it can happen when you're asleep at night, that Stromboli can suddenly explode, that it can destroy your house and bury you inside.
Stromboli is an island volcano with prodigious activity. Its eruptive mouth has been spitting volcanic bombs and lava flows continuously for more than 2,500 years. Perched on its flanks, the village of Ginostra has lived for generations to the tune of the mountain's moods. Most of the inhabitants have quit the island for more clement horizons, fleeing Stromboli's regular eruptions. But a handful of hardliners refuse to leave their native land.
I think the reason people stay there is because that's their home. That's where they've been born. You know, why would you leave? I mean, what we find is that even in some places where the volcanologists can make forecasts that there will be a crisis, and there's even a mandatory evacuation by the government, sometimes villagers don't evacuate.
Pasquale decided to stay on the island that saw him born, despite the dangers.
We who are from here, we are very attentive to the sounds we hear, the slightly strange feelings. We're already ready to leave. Someone who's not from here may not even notice what's going on. It's a matter of minutes, of seconds. In a few seconds, you must try to escape, to find safety. I remember when I was a child and the older people would tell me about Stromboli erupting. I kept in mind the terrible stories that tell of this experience. And I remember that at night, I dreamed of fire, rivers of magma flooding through the streets. I knew very well my mother wouldn't like me saying I wanted to stay. I remember she cried when I told her. Fate has relegated us to this place, and we continue to live here. The dangers go hand in hand with the good points, its beauty, its nature. It's like a god you must respect, yet at the same time fear. We know that at any time it could destroy everything, and we could even lose our lives.
In the immense crash of eruptions, the Earth is torn apart, pulverized, battered by the wind, giving birth to another destructive phenomenon, a fine volcanic dust. This ash covers entire regions, enveloping populations in a thick volcanic cloud.
Volcanic ash is generally the smaller particles that are created during a volcanic explosion.
Magma contains dissolved gases, which are kept inside that magma at a high pressure inside the volcano. When the volcano erupts, then those gases get released, and the gases drive the explosive activity. They push the magma.
And the smaller particles, the blown apart pieces of magma, are volcanic ash. And those are given the energy from the explosion to put them up into the atmosphere, and then eventually they rain down according to the size of the eruption at places further away from the volcano.
In Japan, the Sakurajima volcano is in permanent eruption. Ashes and debris rain down on the population daily. The 600,000 inhabitants of Kagoshima still carry the traumatic scars of the eruption that nearly swept away their city. On January 12, 1914, with Sakurajima dormant for almost a century, a powerful eruption, bigger than any recorded in Japan in the 20th century, devastated the region. 60 people lost their lives, and the city was buried beneath the ashes. While waiting for the next major eruption, life is organized under the ashes of Sakurajima.
For many volcanic hazards, the only way to prepare for them is to be prepared to get out of their pathway, so not to be close to them when there's a chance that they might occur.
So evacuation drills are tremendously important, especially when you have a volcano that is likely to erupt, it's frequently active.
Each year, on the anniversary of the Great Eruption, an evacuation drill is held in real conditions to prepare the population for the worst. The 6,000 inhabitants of the isthmus formed by the volcano are assembled and evacuated. Mr. Shimada is one of them.
I find taking part in evacuation drills reassuring. We know people suffered a lot during the Great Eruption, so we train every year to avoid repeating the catastrophe.
These exercises are carried out with rigor and discipline.
It's extremely important so that everybody can understand the role that they would play in that situation and the procedure for how to move and how to get people out.
the ash falls deeply mark the community's daily routine. From childhood, the inhabitants of Sakurajima learn to integrate volcanic vagaries in their habits. On the way to school, the safety instructions are strict and protective helmets are the order of the day.
Volcanic ash is a very important phenomena that comes out of volcanoes because it acts in all sorts of different ways. Often it's associated as well, it has a coating of acid and it can burn vegetation and cause problems for the crops.
Iceland is a 100% volcanic island. Its inhabitants have also learned to live with the permanent risk of a sudden eruption. Here, the intense heat of volcanoes rubs shoulders with the biting cold of glaciers. When these two opposite elements meet, the magma is pulverized in a terrible clash, giving birth to huge ash plumes.
Phreatomagmatic eruptions are so explosive because as that steam is created, it acts to help blow the magma apart, so it creates an additional component of explosion. And obviously there's all that energy for the steam from converting from the water form to the gaseous form, which creates a desire to expand outwards, taking the magma and blowing it apart with it.
At the foot of the Eyjafjallajökull volcano is a small farm that has been handed down from father to son for generations.
The most difficult moments of my life were having to give up all those animals and leave my farm and our home. Our farm was no longer the safest place for us.
On March 20, 2010, Eyjafjallajökull began to erupt, and the magma encountered the glacier topping this active volcano.
We were told that an eruption had begun in the volcano around 1 a.m. And by 6 o'clock, we had confirmation that it was under the glacier. We fed the animals and made sure that they had enough water and hay because we expected a cloud of ash the next day. And it came. It was dark here for 3 days.
It will coat the landscape in ash, so it will compromise agriculture, it will kill livestock, it will get in the lungs of livestock. There'll be many, many different problems.
The eruption lasted 6 weeks. We couldn't do anything but wait and hope it would stop. 5 centimeters of ash fell around the farm, and all the fields were black. We didn't know if the grass would ever grow back.
There are some more technological ways that volcanoes can interrupt our lives. In 2010, the eruption of Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland, which was a relatively modest-sized event, caused a global crisis for aviation.
Volcanic ash can be ingested into aircraft jet engines, and it can damage those engines, and in some cases it can cause those engines to stop during flight. So there's a very significant risk associated with commercial aviation encountering volcanic ash.
The Reykjavik Air Traffic Control Center then experienced the biggest crisis in its history. The ash cloud extended to the south, covering all of Western Europe, nailing planes to the ground. And when they finally could take off, the long-haul flights outbound to the US had to bypass the cloud by passing through northern Iceland. The small airport in Reykjavik handled more than 1,000 planes a day, double its maximum capacity. 70% of air traffic in Europe was grounded, some 16,000 flights. The European Commission evaluated the direct economic repercussions of the eruption at 2 billion euros.
I think pyroclastic flows are the deadliest phenomenon.
Ash is a cunning enemy. It gets into everything. But when the fine dust is mixed with burning volcanic gases, it turns into a terrible force for destruction.
A pyroclastic flow is a hot volcanic avalanche that's formed from volcanic gas and volcanic ash collapsing and flowing down the sides of the volcano.
If you're caught in a pyroclastic flow, there is very little chance of survival.
When I look at that school building destroyed and compare it to the one before the eruption, it makes me so sad that I cry. Tears come to my eyes and I cry.
In Japan, in the 1990s, Mount Unzen released dozens of pyroclastic flow. The landscape was disfigured for months by these incandescent avalanches. Mr. Oshimo, a teacher, returns to the vestiges of his school, swept away by the volcano's burning breath.
At first, the locals and I did not know what a pyroclastic flow was. It was the first time that we'd heard that word. At the time of the eruption, it was totally different from what I had experienced that far. I had never seen the dome of lava collapse into such a fiery cloud. It split, and we had to evacuate each time in different directions. But I had never watched them closely. The main thing at that moment was staying alive. I narrowly escaped death, so I remember the fear I felt then. When this school burned on September the 15th, all the teachers and students were evacuated, the local residents too, so we didn't have any dead or injured in the fire.
The only protection from a pyroclastic flow is not to be in the area that that pyroclastic flow is going to go into.
Though modern-day watchers have learned to decipher the warning signs of the eruptions and resist the volcano's onslaughts, 2,000 years ago, they knew nothing of their dangers.
An example of an eruption that generated significant pyroclastic flows is the AD 79 eruption of Vesuvius, where you had, what we think, column collapse from the Plinian column, with the pyroclastic flows then running down the sides of the volcano and destroying settlements like Herculaneum and Pompeii.
Imagine the arrival of this matter, a cloud of volcanic ash dozens of meters high, totally black, and at an extremely high temperature, a high temperature that carbonizes wood and kills the inhabitants. It must be much worse than hell.
The pyroclastic flow that fell on Pompeii and Herculaneum claimed more than 3,000 lives. Buried beneath the ash, the two cities were only rediscovered in the 18th century. Mauro De Vito is a volcanologist. By studying the deposits of ashes, he has reconstructed the day these two Roman cities were wiped off the map.
The effect of the pyroclastic flow at very high temperatures was so intense that we find all these disarticulated bodies in disorder. These bodies were studied, and we found that death was caused by asphyxia, but also by the very high temperature which dehydrated bodies instantly.
Perfectly preserved by volcanic ash, the remains of Herculaneum and Pompeii are today invaluable witnesses for historians.
This mass obviously engulfed the corridors, filled the rooms, and in many cases flattened walls. It moved boats and many other objects, even the very biggest, sometimes tossing them into other walls, like missiles.
In 1944, Vesuvius began erupting again. For Neapolitans, it was a real shock.
The latest eruption of Vesuvius in 1944 happened at the end of the Second World War, when the city of Naples had plenty of other problems to handle. There was the Allied bombing, and in the memory of our elders, the volcano was just a volcano that produced intense phenomena. But they didn't see it as dangerous. Obviously, the populations directly affected by a phenomenon perpetuate the memory, but with time, this memory fades very easily.
Today, Vesuvius still towers over the city of Naples and threatens the 600,000 inhabitants with its terrible pyroclastic flow. Volcanoes harbour another deadly scourge that's much more surprising.
Volcanoes and water don't mix, or when they do mix, it's an explosive combination.
When living mountains awake, glaciers melt and riverbeds overflow. In Indonesia, torrential rains are a threat to populations near volcanoes. The authorities regularly evacuate thousands of inhabitants.
It's always the same thing that scares me. When it's cloudy, when it rains, and mainly the risks of flooding.
The island of Java has a tropical climate marked by heavy precipitation, which falls on the Semeru volcano, which is covered with ashes. Huge quantities of volcanic debris are swept along, forming destructive mudslides.
Explosive eruptions can disperse volcanic ash over long distances from volcanoes. That ash can be remobilized by rainfall to form what we call a lahar, which is essentially a volcanic debris flow, or a flow of water that contains volcanic ash and other volcanic debris. Lahars can be incredibly destructive. They can travel quite long distances from the volcano.
Indra knows how important evacuation drills can be. She lost several members of her family in these volcanic torrents.
Someone from my family was evacuated with her parents. She had already left, but just after, she returned to fetch the goats. The flood arrived, and she couldn't cope. She couldn't lift her legs. So she reached out to grab someone, missed him, then caught him, then found herself in a tree where there were so many people it collapsed. After that, she was caught in a whirlwind. She was 9 months pregnant, and she died. She was family.
We were about 13 kilometers from the summit of Semeru. We never have hot clouds. But if the cold lava goes down here, our men and our women will be the most affected. We have a total population of 120,000 people who must be evacuated as quickly as possible. So, the scenario here is that we have to save the people who work at the river and those who work in the fields. As soon as the siren sounds, they must run to the security point on the other side of the river or to the right of the river. This river represents a means of livelihood for the population here. That's why they should be trained in what to do when it floods. They must save only their lives and leave behind them any equipment like cars, etc. Just their lives. They must know that, but they already know the natural signs. When there's a big mass that whitens at the top, it means they must avoid it, move away from it.
Basically, we're always afraid. It's the Almighty who decides.
Volcanoes contain some of the most extraordinary landscapes on our planet. But these wonders of nature sometimes hide insidious dangers, invisible to the naked eye. The Kawah Ijen crater in Indonesia is home to the most acidic lake in the world, a huge pool of turquoise water saturated with sulfur.
Kawah Ijen is an extraordinary volcano. It's got probably the largest vat of hot acid in the world, kind of bath temperature, and so acidic that if you put anything metal in it, it will corrode pretty quickly. It's not a good place to go swimming.
Kawah Ijen's huge crater is not big enough to contain this toxic water. The lake overflows and seeps into the waterways that irrigate the whole valley. Sumati is a volcanologist. She watches Kawah Ijen's acid lake like milk on the stove.
Here, the pH is 0, so the acidity is extremely high, the same as Kawah Ijen's lake water. River water with a pH of 0 or close to it is very dangerous for the environment, the plants, and the soil.
This water is poison for the region's inhabitants. Whether consumed directly or used to irrigate the rice paddies scattered throughout this territory, Kawah Ijen's acid water poses a significant health risk. Saijun, chief of Bantal village, has been fighting this scourge for years.
People who consume water from the river, they do not only suffer from diarrhea or itching, they also suffer from dental problems. Their teeth are very fragile. Many of them are toothless. And if they are not toothless, their teeth are red. They can't be cleaned, no matter what product you use, because it's already embedded inside. The problem with the water affects 10,000 people.
To fight against the acid waters of Kawah Ijen, Indonesians got together and dug a dense network of wells and pipes to draw water directly from the groundwater.
Here the water is 90 meters deep, because at 90 meters there is clean water that the population can consume. They are very happy with this situation. That is because it is no longer necessary to consume water from the river.
In Hawaii, Mauna Loa is the largest volcano on our planet. Forced from the waves by successive eruptions, it grows layer by layer over millennia. But this volcanic colossus is unstable. Its gigantic structure hides a surprising danger which threatens all the archipelago's coastline.
If you look at volcanoes, you often find that, especially ones in islands or coasts, you find big slices out of them where the volcano has collapsed. And in many coastal and island volcanoes, those collapses go into the sea. And if they've happened fast enough, they will displace the sea and produce a huge tsunami. And by huge, it's tens of meters. So the tsunamis can be much larger than those generated by earthquakes. Islands like Hawaii that have got these collapses. And there's evidence from the geology that they've had these huge waves in the distant past.
Jared Fryer is a geologist. He is studying the impact of a tsunami that struck the island several thousand years ago, the better to predict the next tidal wave.
You see a cliff. It doesn't look very large. It's only from 100 to 200 meters high, okay. But we think it is the sidewall of a giant landslide. Total volume of the landslide was several hundred cubic kilometers, or maybe 1,000 cubic kilometers. Drew down water level probably about 2 kilometers. So this is a gigantic wave, probably about 150 to 200 meters high. So it washes ashore a tremendous distance. Or the one here, 250,000 years ago, yes, it would have taken about maybe 10, 15 minutes. They're just, wow. These landslides, they seem to occur every 50,000 years or so. And there's maybe a dozen of them that we can identify offshore. So it is a recurrent phenomenon. Fortunately, in a human lifetime, it's a very rare event. But as far as the volcano is concerned, it is a very important part of how the volcano evolves and grows.
Tsunamis are a permanent danger in Hawaii. Whether caused by the collapse of a volcano or earthquakes, they threaten all the coastal cities of the archipelago. These quakes are closely related to the volcanism of the Pacific Ring of Fire. From the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, Jared monitors the coast of Hawaii for the slightest tremor. In the event of an alert, all of the archipelago's settlements are immediately evacuated to the highest points of the Hawaiian Islands.
The big hazard historically in Hawaii is tsunamis that come across the ocean from great earthquakes around the Pacific, the Ring of Fire. And those have caused extreme flooding and caused a lot of deaths. The primary concern is big earthquakes, which generate tsunamis. So everything is keyed to earthquakes.
I hope it'll be coming through, but if it doesn't...
For Hawaii, we have to be faster, because if there is a local earthquake, the tsunami travels very fast through the islands.
So not only...
Every family has been through one of these things. And by far the worst was 1946.
Mountainous waves at 450 miles an hour hit the Hawaiian Islands, creating the most costly disaster in the history of our newest state.
The tsunami devastated the Hawaiian coast, killing close to 160 people. Benedict, one of the survivors, carries with her the traumatic memory of the disaster.
The house started to lift up and move. And my father was afraid that we would be crushed. So he threw me out into the water. So we hung onto a hedge out there and let the water go back down, out a little bit. And as it went out, then we were able to walk down on the rocks and get away. People went out and they saw the water going out and they saw fish flopping, and they grabbed fish. And then when the next wave came in, they were covered with water. We pay attention now.
Fiery furnaces, lunar landscapes, deserts of ash. Volcanoes are symbols of destruction and desolation.
So the truth is that if you look into human history, there's lots of examples of cities being destroyed by volcanic eruptions, or even civilizations that seem to come to an end when there's a dramatic volcanic crisis. But actually, you know what? Across the course of human history, volcanoes have given humanity far more than they've taken away.
Yet in their bowels, they hide astonishing riches. On landscapes burnt to a cinder by lava and suffocated by ash, a new life cycle is beginning.
And so very quickly, after a volcanic eruption, the system can re-establish and the volcanic ecosystem can be vibrant.
On the slopes of volcanoes, hell can suddenly turn into paradise.
There is this tremendous synergy, symbiotic relationship between life and the volcano that's quite dramatic.
Volcanoes are a force of nature. For millions of years, they have unleashed their indomitable power on our planet, threatening 500 million people across the globe. Facing this peril, a group of passionate men and women took on a mission to understand and to protect. Maurice and Katja Kraft, pioneers of modern volcanology, were among the first to cross the barrier of fire.
So the cliche of a volcanologist is not me. I would have a beard and a checky shirt, and I'd be standing like this.
The latest technological advances have transformed volcanology. Satellites, sensors, and drones now accompany scientists on their missions. Today, amongst these heirs, the passion remains intact.
It was a very humbling experience to come out here and witness this firsthand.
They relentlessly roam the volcanoes of the world, guided by their fascination for the giants of fire.
There's definitely something sexy and exciting about being a volcanologist.
In Tanzania, Oldonyo Dlengai dominates the Rift Valley from its 3,000-meter perch.
For all volcanologists, it's already exciting to work on an active volcano, and for me, this is an even more exciting volcano in that it's the one on which I cut my teeth as a volcanologist.
10 years ago, young volcanologist Mathieu Kervin climbed to the top of Lengai for the first time. The vast crater was then filled by unique lava that whitens on contact with the air, forming a spectacular, immaculate landscape. Several months later, a huge eruption decapitated the summit, and the volcano was transfigured. Since then, Mathieu Kervin has sworn to return to the top of the Tanzanian volcano to observe its transformation. The profession of volcanologist is not far removed from that of explorer. To reach this volcano at the end of the Earth, Mathieu Kervin sets off on a grueling expedition. He hopes finally to achieve his dream, to map the huge crater formed by the last eruption of Lengai.
I sometimes think that being a scientist is like being a modern-day explorer. And I became a volcanologist, which also has an element of going to extreme places or to unusual places, perhaps.
The privilege of working on volcanoes is that it takes us to some fascinating places around the world. It means I've been able to visit and work in places I wouldn't otherwise have visited.
Accompanied by a geologist and a local guide, Mathieu Kervin is determined to collect essential data on one of the world's least studied volcanoes because of its isolation.
The Lengai is a very little studied volcano, in particular because there are almost no instruments on this volcano to record signals that could indicate future eruptions or tell us what is happening deep in the magmatic reservoirs. And on top of that, once you've reached the foot of this volcano, you still need to climb it, and it really is a very steep stratovolcano. The higher you climb, the more you're forced to continue on all fours, on fairly unstable rocky slopes with rolling stones, which is also why very few scientists venture to the summit to observe its eruptions.
Before beginning the ascent of Lengai, Mathieu Kervin must obtain the blessing of the Laibon, spiritual guide of the Maasai tribe who have lived for centuries at the foot of the giant.
They are returning safe and sound. I know because a Laibon is never wrong, always right. These stones must be tied to you. You must lick them every morning on your way to the volcano and on the way back home. They will protect you.
Lost in the immensity of the Rift Valley, this volcano is not for the faint-hearted. A difficult climb on an unstable slope of more than 45 degrees separates the intrepid volcanologist and his team from the summit.
One of the steepest volcanoes I've ever climbed really is one where, as you get towards the top, you go 2 steps up and you slide down a step and you just try and keep going. Very much a multi-sensory experience. There's what you're looking at and the views below you, both into the crater and down the flanks, but also the sounds of the volcano, the whooshes, and then, of course, the smell. The smell of sulfur and other gases assail your nose as the wind wafts the gases towards you. You might feel the vibrations of explosive eruptions through your feet. You might feel them in your chest. One of the great things about climbing a volcano, which I think you don't get necessarily if you're climbing any other mountain, is there's something that you can't see until you get to the top, which is inside the crater. And often you're overwhelmed by what you see in terms of the activity and the topography and so on, the landforms.
Mathieu Kervin's efforts are finally rewarded. At his feet, the crater of Lengai is revealed in all its enormity.
I get the impression that we're feeling tiny tremors directly on the surface. It's really magical to come back here after so long.
Now the work can begin. Mathieu Kervin's mission is to map this huge depression using a drone. A rare opportunity to observe the mysterious lava of the Tanzanian giant.
We can get really close, and we can really take a look in its mouth. We mustn't get too close, mind you. Ah, that's exceptional. This really is why we came. These are really projections, perhaps a small lava lake deep down with exploding bubbles, and we can see its surface.
Volcanology can be quite a dangerous science if you're actually going to the volcano to study it. But we need to take that risk in order to understand the volcanoes so that we can try to ultimately preserve life.
In Ecuador, atop the volcano Cotopaxi, there's the high-altitude freezing cold that volcanologists like Silvana must face to carry out their mission.
The altitude varies the pressure significantly, which directly affects our body, and the consequences can be quite unpleasant.
Cotopaxi is topped with huge glaciers. In the event of an eruption, the melting ice could pose a mortal danger.
Eruptions under ice can create a large volume of meltwater, and that can suddenly burst out of the topography that confines it to form a kind of rapid flood of volcanic material. Most commonly, that melting occurs through localized pyroclastic flows that flow over the snow and ice cover and melt that, and that mobilizes the mixture of ash and water.
To prevent this major risk, Silvana must regularly install sensors at the foot of the glaciers in extreme conditions at over 6,000 meters in altitude. She gets up at dawn and leaves her refuge to challenge the giant of ice and fire.
Everything is frozen.
It snowed a lot yesterday. It's all dry inside. There's no problem.
Yes, that's good.
We'll see what state the battery's in.
That's not so bad.
It's great. The battery works well at 13.
Yes, it's just the snow that fell during the night.
Yes, it fell during the night. So we'll quickly clean the panels and take the readings. Here on Cotopaxi, it's very important that we have stations to enable us to detect the lahars. We bury the sensors at 80 centimeters to 1 meter underground, depending on how easy it is to dig into the ground. It's not always easy, especially when there's permafrost.
The phone battery's not working well in this cold.
At this high altitude, oxygen is rare and the cold glacial. At any moment, altitude sickness threatens to render the volcanologists' efforts useless.
Here, the Andean Cordillera is very high. It's difficult to work at altitude. We move less quickly. We think a little more slowly, too. And when you have altitude sickness, there can be unpleasant consequences, nausea, migraines, which complicates the situation. In that case, you must go down as soon as possible so your state doesn't worsen.
To reach the volcano's inaccessible folds, strength and endurance are sometimes insufficient. Then, volcanologists' missions can almost involve aerobatics. The summit of Ruapeo hides a lake with an acidic crater. Agnes Mazot regularly flies over the lake to take samples that enable her to measure the volcano's activity.
The Ruapeo volcano is much observed because it can have lahars, mudslides, water with gas and rocks and ash. It's like a big mudslide that can hurtle down. That's why we keep a close eye on it.
So phreatomagmatic eruptions, one of the main dangers can be how unpredictable they are, because they're not just unpredictable because of the way that the magma is moving inside the volcano, but also in terms of whether or not it interacts with water. So for some eruptions, you can get very, very sudden eruptions because suddenly hot magma comes into contact with water and you get an explosion.
On December 24, 1953, a mudslide from the crater lake swept away the railway bridge on the Auckland-Wellington line. Several minutes later, the express arrived at full speed and plunged into the river. 151 people lost their lives in the disaster. The sampling operation can begin, a sensitive maneuver which demands the greatest precision.
This volcano is pretty hard to understand. It can have two types of eruption. One we can see coming weeks in advance, and another type for which there's no warning. You close it, and if there are bubbles, you have to fill it again. It gets very emotional. I have to come here to feel it, to understand what's happening. It's my passion, and I work on volcanoes.
Lava is the holy grail for any volcanologist, the culmination of a life of adventure. It is the raw materials of volcanoes, the key to the great mystery. But reaching it is no easy task. Eric Storm has made it his quest. In Hawaii, in the vast deserts of cold lava flows, he defies the sharp rocks and the blazing sun to unearth an active lava flow.
Lava is actually mesmerizing, and it's constantly changing. If you're watching a lava flow, particularly a basaltic lava flow, you can see it crusting over, and then it bursts through, and it changes, and the colors change all the time.
When we approach these lava flows, the first thing you feel is the radiant heat. With the molten lava being upwards of 1100 degrees, you can feel that heat from several meters away. Obviously, the closer you get, the more intensified that heat becomes. There's a lot of gases involved, like sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, so you get that very pungent smell of the gases when you approach the flows as well. There's absolutely a risk taking samples of lava. You know, we just don't know how fast the lava can move sometimes. And so, you know, being cautious and safe is the #1 factor when it comes to sampling the lava.
There can be lava tubes, which means that the crust is very thin, and there can be very, very hot magma underneath travelling through the lava tunnel. So there is a risk that you could step through.
It was a very humbling experience to come out here and witness this firsthand. And remember, we're talking over 1,000 degrees. Well, when I first moved to Volcano Village, which is just a couple kilometers from the summit of the volcano became my backyard, essentially, my living laboratory and my playground all at the same time. The feeling when we find a lava flow is really indescribable. It's very exciting. It's very spiritual in many ways. It's such a special place to be.
For these explorers of the modern era, volcanologist isn't a job, it's a vocation, a proper love story. For these scientists, rationality sometimes gives way to fascination.
Volcanologists have a real passion about the volcanoes they study. And I guess that can just be summed up by it's a love affair. We all are passionately in love with volcanoes and their natural beauty, but also their power. And they're just endlessly fascinating scientifically.
This is one of the most active volcanoes in Europe, raised from the waves by successive eruptions. Stromboli frightens and fascinates with its impressive explosions. A true laboratory volcano, it is a reference for volcanologists the world over. Scientists of all stripes come to its crater to test their hypotheses. Since he started out, Francesco Sortino has always sworn by Stromboli. That's where he made his debut as a volcanologist and built his knowledge. The first time Francesco climbed to the slopes of Stromboli, it was love at first sight.
It was a special story. It's as if I'd been called by the volcano, as if it had said quite clearly, "Come and work here, stay with me." When I arrived here, something in me changed. That's why I'm tied to this place, not just professionally, but also from an emotional point of view.
Today, he has an almost carnal relationship with the living mountain.
I think if you ask most volcanologists, they've always got their favorite volcano. It's quite interesting. I mean, we're scientists, we're rational scientists, we shouldn't have that. But you talk to most volcanologists and they will say, oh, my favorite volcano is X. And the reason for it being X is because when they went there, it was doing something. It was erupting, it was doing something spectacular, and they fell in love with it there and then.
The last eruption, the last lava flow we had on Stromboli, was in August 2014. Before, there had been a very high level of explosive activity of a strength I'd never seen. There were explosions you'd feel in your heart. They'd almost make your heart explode. It's clear that the days of Harun Tazieff are over. And even if the technology of Tazieff's time has moved on a great deal, so it's a little romantic to think you can just go measuring, taking readings directly in the crater. I can't imagine being permanently at my desk, directing measurement from a computer. I need to come here and feel the volcano, to touch it, to look at it, to do something in the field, because that gives me much more of a chance of understanding than by sitting behind a computer.
Fieldwork is the bread and butter of volcanology, so it's what kind of keeps the lifeblood of volcanology going.
Because there's nothing really that compares. You can read volumes of papers about a volcano, but the first time you go out there and actually see the situation for yourself, it really changes your perception about how the volcano is working.
Ciao Jacopo. Ciao. Che state facendo qui?
Often you can have quite a large team of people who all of whom have different scientific goals on the same expedition. And I've had some really, really successful field campaigns with the INGV in Italy on volcanoes like Etna and Stromboli.
We have several cameras, from high-def cameras to high-speed cameras, cameras that record thermal infrared. Well, that makes it possible to see very different aspects. The speed at which clastic rocks emerge, the position of the eruptive mouths, the gas escaping from these mouths. The overall aim is to study the volcano's explosive activity. For other groups, it's also an opportunity to test new instruments. For example, the balloons are something new, something we've never tried. Stromboli is a laboratory volcano. I think I've done a fair bit for that laboratory. My work as a volcanologist has always been bound up with my life. Everything I've done to give meaning to my work, but also to myself.
More than 10,000 kilometers in distance, another enthusiast is making her childhood dream come true at the summit of a volcano. Piton de la Fournaise looks down on Réunion Island from atop its 2,600 meters. With every eruption, the volcano gains ground on the sea. Layer after layer, the volcanic island grows, spreading its black rock into the ocean. Aline Pelletier knows Piton de la Fournaise like the back of her hand. Just 35 years old, she is the first woman to hold the position of director of Réunion's Volcanological Observatory. At each eruption, she ignores the danger and rushes to the lava to collect valuable samples.
Allez, on recule. Attention derrière. Hop. Voilà, on va circuler un peu. Ah, attention. Là, on a un bel échantillon.
I think often the relationship with volcanoes begins in childhood, but I think it's like all kids, you know, they're fascinated by dinosaurs and volcanoes, and most of them pass through that stage and become interested in other things. But for those who you know, it really captures the imagination, I think that will often stay with people.
In a calm period, Aline Pelletier visits the Piton's rugged slopes every day to take its pulse. Aline grew up with this volcano. She too caught the bug at a very early age.
I found my vocation very early, on a trip to Italy to the Stromboli volcano when I was in high school, and was treated to the sight of an erupting volcano. I was fascinated by the beauty of the spectacle. From that moment, I wanted to become a volcanologist. I've got the results of last week. We've got 3 times more.
The Enclos Fouquet is an immense caldera formed following the collapse of the volcano upon itself. At the bottom of this depression, 300 meters deep and 3 kilometers across, volcanic activity has resumed. Each day, the landscape is transformed as the volcanologists look on.
A small crater from 2015 with the fault that opened here. The last significant eruptions, I'm thinking mainly of the one in April 2007, which is really the eruption the team at the observatory call historic, as never since man's arrival on the island had anyone seen an eruption with as much lava. There was 200 million cubic meters of surface lava, which is 10 times that of a classic eruption. Fountains of lava 200 meters high, whereas an average eruption will reach nearer 20 meters, and the formation of a caldera at the crater's summit. That means that the crater, in 2 days, collapsed to a depth of 300 meters over a diameter of around 1 kilometer. You could put the Eiffel Tower in there. It really was the first time that had been seen at the Piton de la Fournaise since man came to the island.
Aline Pelletier puts her unparalleled knowledge of the Piton at the service of protecting the population.
We really work for the population, not just for research. It really is a forensic investigation. We try to understand what's happening. We try to warn the population in time, and that's the exciting aspect of a volcanologist's work at the observatory.
many young children just really feel that connection to volcanoes and the power that they have. And sometimes that turns into a bit more of a scientific interest as well.
Like all the volcanologists of her generation, Aline Pelletier was inspired by a legendary couple of adventurers. Nicknamed the Volcano Devils, Maurice and Katja Kraft were among the first to brave the volcanic dangers close to the lava flows. In a 25-year career, they witnessed more than 175 eruptions and constantly communicated their passion to the public. Thanks to them, our knowledge of volcanoes has taken a giant leap. But on June 3rd, 1991, the risk associated with their passion caught up with them. A pyroclastic flow from the Japanese volcano Unzen took these indefatigable chroniclers of the Earth's anger. The Kraft heirs are today inhabited by the same passion. Scientific progress has now provided them with new tools for studying volcanoes while minimizing the risks.
We have to use clues from a wide range of different sources to piece together a picture of what is happening deep inside the Earth's crust.
You have to know physics. You are also a chemist.
Probably the most important part is the human imagination, trying to imagine what is that volcano doing down there.
So if you want to understand why the volcano is erupting, you have to understand a little bit of a lot of different sciences.
For more than 30 years, Ari Trosti Gudmundsson has crisscrossed the Icelandic volcanoes. Today, he is returning to one of them, the one most scrutinized by scientists. Located to the southwest of the island, the archipelago of the Vestman Islands is composed of 14 islands that are gradually emerging from the sea as a product of underwater eruptions. The youngest of them, the island of Surtsey, emerged just 50 years ago.
When a volcano erupts in the sea, the first thing that might happen as the lava meets the seawater is to have very violent explosions because the water boils and the steam expands, and this can be a very violent process with rather dramatic sprays of rock and steam and water into the air.
These young volcanic lands are fragile. As soon as it appeared, the island of Surtsey was sanctuarized in order to preserve it from any human intervention. Very few scientists are authorized to set foot on this new land for fear of disturbing its ecosystem. Ari Trosti Gudmundsson has this huge privilege. Since the island was born, he has been witness to its perpetual transformation.
In 1964, I was 14 years old. I was lucky enough because I knew people in the aviation business. I was able to fly more than once all over the island while it was erupting directly from the sea with the black columns, later on with the lava. That was the greatest moment to step the first time onto the island. And this would be 1971. And that's after the eruption stopped, but this was smoking. And we found some spots that were too hot to touch. I write poetry, a somewhat poetic connection to both the sires and to a place like Surtsey.
The volcanologist knows that the little island's days are numbered. Eroded by wind and water, Surtsey is surely destined to disappear.
The island started to change shape very slowly as a consequence of the erosion by the oceans, the waves, and through wind and rain. So Surtsey offered a dramatic opportunity for people to study the recovery or the establishment of an ecosystem fresh after an eruption.
Being a geologist, you are, of course, in some way a historian. And to be here is, of course, somewhat emotional thing because you are in very close contact with the origin of not only the Earth, but yourself. We come from the elements that are here, and they are coming from supernovas and whatever somewhere in the world.
In studying volcanoes, one of the biggest challenges we have is the fact that a lot of material and a lot of things that happen unseen underground. And also in the huge phase of an eruption, a lot of what is going on is obscured. Interpreting the rocks from a volcano is exactly like reading them.
These researchers read the living mountains like an open book. Each geological layer is a page to decipher. For over 50 years, Pierre Boivin has covered every inch of the Auvergne volcanoes. He has devoted his life to studying volcanism in the Auvergne and the many mysteries still to be revealed. This knowledge enables him to revive sleeping giants. Flying over the chain of Puy, Pierre Boivin reconstructs the formation of this incredible alignment of volcanoes.
When you see these volcanoes and these forms so fresh, so suggestive, one can easily imagine their eruption. The cones are topped with a crown of fire with bombs piling up all around. The definition of extinct volcanoes is that they are more than 10,000 years old. So if they're less than 10,000 years old, they're just asleep.
But it is under the ground, at a depth of more than 25 meters, that volcanoes deliver their best-kept secrets. Safely harnessed, Pierre Boivin sinks into the Auvergne basement. Le Creux du Soucy is an immense underground cavity formed by the passage of lava flow. Its walls feature the entire volcanic history of the region.
Understanding volcanoes is a little bit like detective work, where what we have to do is take the pieces of information that we can access and use that to kind of recreate what we think happened. So it's very much a process of deduction, understanding past eruptions in volcanology.
At this spot, there is a remnant of ancient soil which keep a trace in the form of small pieces of wood that allows us to date it to around 9,300 years ago. So man was already here and witnessed the eruption. We can see gray layers, clear layers, which are the deposits of a volcano that has erupted very violently. And there, this isn't aerial fallout. It really was a blast that destroyed everything in its path. And if there was a floor, everything was flattened and there is no trace of it. And from time to time, there were bombs tossed into the air which came and got stuck in these deposits that were being left on the ground. For a geologist, it's like finding a treasure chest. You just have to look and sample carefully. A summary in the form of layers of rock, the whole local history. All the researchers tell us that our factory that makes magma still works. On the other hand, the time scales are such that we are not able to say when something will come out. We cannot predict the future at all.
Many volcanologists, their primary concern might be to understand the volcano, but the reason they're doing that is because they want to protect people. They want to protect the villagers, the people who live there.
In hotspots the world over, volcanologists probe the bowels of volcanoes to anticipate eruptions and sound the alert.
We really need a combination of fundamental scientific research to understand the nuts and the bolts of how the volcanoes are working. But without thinking about how to communicate, or without effective communication with the local populations, then that is pointless. You need to have both.
In Ecuador, the 5,000-meter-high Tungurahua dominates the Banos region. Here, scientists rely on the empirical knowledge of local populations, who for generations have been living at the foot of these giants of fire and have learned to interpret the warning signs of an eruption. Jorge is a young farmer who has lived all his life at the foot of Tungurahua. He has felt the lash of the volcano's anger. Today, he has decided to put his experience at the service of his community by becoming one of the Tungurahua Watchers. In collaboration with the Volcanological Observatory, Jorge daily monitors volcano activity, on the lookout for the slightest resurgence of activity.
We must be present at any time of the day, round the clock, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We must be attentive, radio always hooked to your belt. You must be in permanent contact with the Institute to warn them if necessary and to receive information.
So there's some really great examples from around the world, the way that communities come together to live with the hazards. So, for example, around Tungurahua volcano in Ecuador, they have a system of volcano watchers who then share information and also share information with the volcano observatory, but then also with the local communities.
So Tungurahua is a fascinating volcano. As a scientist, it's a very deadly volcano as well. It's a huge volcanic mountain in Ecuador, and it burst back to life in 1999 with quite a dramatic increase in activity.
All the southern part for the Andes was dark. Nothing could be seen. It was like a storm as we approached, with lightning flashing. All this part of the sky, it was just like a storm. We were scared. We took some pan lids and blankets and covered our heads with them because it was raining stones. They made a noise, tss, puff, on the ground, and the ground caught fire like the embers in a barbecue. The stones were huge, so people were crying, shouting, running in circles. They didn't know whether to run or stay where they were. It was hell. All these events, we faced them and we survived. And now we can tell others, future generations, so that they can prepare for and deal better with situations of this kind.
Good evening. You're informed that activity is slow, production is zero. As expected, it rained today until about 2 a.m.
Supported by volcanologists, the population has decided to take its destiny in hand. Jorge reports to the Volcanological Observatory every evening to share his observations.
One of the things that happened there that was and a great response was the local observatory and also the people managing the risk decided to start involving the communities in the watching of the volcanic activity.
And that is a remarkable way that people have actually taken it upon themselves to manage the volcano that they live near.
You're informed that there is a layer of snow from 600 meters below the level of the crater. That's all the information I can give you. Remain in contact. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
That's really empowering. You know, the notion that it's not just left to these expert scientists, that communities themselves can look after themselves. I think that's a really important aspect.
Despite the immense progress achieved, volcanology is still in its infancy. Nothing, however, could divert these guardians of the volcano from their mission to understand and protect. This huge task falls to a new generation of volcanologists.
Hoping that I can pass some of that passion on about volcanoes and understanding their hazards and help the next generation of volcanologists come along.